A routine flight. A clear morning sky. 329 people on board, expecting to cross the Atlantic and begin a new day. Then, at 35,000 feet, something happened. No warning. No distress call. No chance to escape. One moment, Air India Flight 182 was flying peacefully over the ocean. The next, it vanished. Not because of bad weather. Not because of pilot error. And not because the aircraft failed. What brought this massive Boeing 747 down began thousands of miles away. Long before the passengers ever stepped on board. A hidden plan. A deadly secret. And a bomb that would turn an ordinary flight into one of the worst acts of aviation terrorism in history. This is the story of Air India Flight 182. And the explosion that changed aviation forever. June 22, 1985. A bright summer morning. The kind of day that felt ordinary. The kind of day thousands of travelers experience every day without giving it a second thought. At airports across Canada. Families hugged goodbye. Suitcases rolled across polished floors. Announcements echoed through crowded terminals. For many passengers, this journey was more than a vacation. It was a trip home. A chance to see loved ones. A reunion months, sometimes years, in the making. Their flight was Air India Flight 182. A Boeing 747-237B. One of the largest and most recognizable passenger aircraft in the world. Its route stretched across continents. The aircraft had departed from Montreal, Canada, and was bound for London, England, before continuing onward to Delhi and Mumbai, India. A long journey across the Atlantic Ocean. A journey expected to be routine. Expected to be safe. Expected to end with joyful arrivals and emotional reunions. On board were 329 people. 307 passengers. 22 crew members. Men. Women. Children. Entire families traveling together. Students returning home. Business travelers. Grandparents eager to see grandchildren. Young couples planning their futures. Each carrying dreams. Plans. Memories. And expectations for tomorrow. Inside the cabin. The atmosphere was calm. Passengers settled into their seats. Some opened books. Others watched clouds drift past the windows. Flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisles. Offering drinks. Answering questions. Helping children get comfortable for the long flight ahead. The massive Boeing climbed steadily into the sky. Its 4 engines hummed with reassuring power. Inside the cockpit. The crew monitored their instruments. Everything appeared normal. Fuel levels. Navigation systems. Weather reports. All exactly as expected. Outside. Conditions were nearly perfect. Clear skies stretched across the Atlantic. No storms. No turbulence warnings. No sign of danger. Thousands of feet below. The ocean shimmered under the summer sun. At cruising altitude. 35,000 feet above the Earth. Air India Flight 182 seemed untouchable. A silver giant crossing an endless blue horizon. Passengers relaxed. Some drifted off to sleep. Others chatted quietly. Children looked out the windows in amazement. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed wrong. But hidden somewhere aboard that aircraft. Far from the sight of passengers. Far from the eyes of the crew. Something else was traveling with them. Something silent. Something deadly. A secret that had already begun counting down the final moments of Flight 182. And no one on board knew it. Hours passed. Air India Flight 182 continued westward over the Atlantic Ocean. Far below. Nothing but endless water. Above. Clear blue skies. Inside the cabin, life went on as normal. Passengers ate meals. Children laughed quietly. Some watched movies. Others slept peacefully beneath thin airline blankets. For them, the journey felt routine, comfortable, safe, but hidden somewhere inside the aircraft. A clock was ticking. Invisible, silent, patient, and every passing minute brought it closer to zero. In the cockpit, the crew remained calm, professional, experienced. They had flown this route before. Navigation checks were completed. Fuel consumption was normal. Engine performance was perfect. Nothing suggested danger. Nothing suggested that this flight was different from hundreds that had come before it. Everything looks good. One of the pilots glanced at the instruments. The captain nodded. Outside the windshield, the Atlantic stretched endlessly toward the horizon. There was no storm to avoid. No emergency to manage. No difficult decisions to make. At least, that was what they believed. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, people on the ground continued their daily lives, unaware that a disaster was already unfolding. Because the true threat was not weather. It was not mechanical failure. And it was not pilot error. The danger had boarded the aircraft long before takeoff. Carefully hidden. Waiting. As the Boeing 747 cruised through the afternoon sky, the passengers remained unaware. A young child pressed her face against the window. Clouds drifted beneath the aircraft like giant white islands. Nearby, a mother smiled. Across the aisle, a businessman reviewed documents. A newly married couple talked quietly about the future. Plans, dreams, destinations, all continuing as normal. And that is what made the situation so terrifying. No warning signs. No unusual sounds. No indication that anything was wrong. The aircraft itself was performing perfectly. Every system worked. Every engine ran smoothly. Every instrument displayed normal readings. The crew trusted the airplane. The passengers trusted the crew. And everyone trusted that they would arrive safely. But hidden inside the cargo hold, beneath luggage and freight containers, something deadly waited in silence. A device. A bomb. Its countdown already underway. No flashing lights. No alarms. No way for anyone on board to know. Minute after minute, the aircraft moved farther from land. Farther from help. Farther from any chance of rescue. The ocean below seemed peaceful. Beautiful even. But if something happened here, there would be nowhere to land. Nowhere to escape. As Flight 182 approached the western coast of Ireland, air traffic controllers monitored its progress. Everything appeared routine. Radio communications remained normal. Position reports were transmitted. Flight paths were confirmed. Nothing seemed unusual. The captain spoke with air traffic control. His voice was calm, relaxed, professional. No one listening to those transmissions could have imagined what was about to happen. The final routine messages passed between the aircraft and the ground. Simple words. Ordinary words. The kind heard thousands of times every day. And then, silence. Not the silence of a completed conversation. A different silence. A disturbing silence. Because at that exact moment, the hidden countdown had almost reached its end. Hundreds of passengers sat unaware. Crew members continued their duties. The Boeing 747 sliced through the sky at 35,000 feet. Everything looked perfect. Everything sounded normal. But deep inside the aircraft, a single device held the power to destroy everything. And in just a few moments, it would. And then, it happened. Without warning. Without a distress call. Without a chance to react. At 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, a violent explosion ripped through Air India Flight 182. 1 second. The Boeing 747 was cruising peacefully through the sky. The next, it was tearing itself apart. A flash. A shockwave. An explosion so powerful that it shattered the aircraft from the inside. Passengers never saw it coming. The crew never had time to respond. The cockpit voice fell silent. The radios went quiet. And in an instant, 329 lives were thrown into chaos. The massive aircraft broke apart high above the ocean. Metal twisted. Sections of the fuselage separated. Luggage, seats, and debris were hurled into the sky. The peaceful Atlantic below became a scene of unimaginable destruction. There were no emergency landings. No final heroic recovery. No second chances. Only seconds. Terrifying seconds. The aircraft that had carried hundreds of dreams across the ocean was gone. Fragments rained down toward the water. The sky itself seemed to explode. And then, nothing. Only silence. A silence where voices had existed moments before. A silence where hopes, plans, and futures had vanished forever. Far below, the Atlantic Ocean swallowed the wreckage. The last traces of Flight 182 disappeared beneath the waves. And one of the deadliest acts of aviation terrorism in history had just unfolded in the sky. For a few moments, nobody knew what had happened. Air traffic controllers waited for a response. Another transmission. Another position report. Anything. But the radio remained silent. Flight 182 had disappeared. At first, there was confusion. Then concern. Then fear. Because aircraft do not simply vanish. Not in clear weather. Not without warning. Search and rescue operations began almost immediately. Ships were redirected. Aircraft were launched. Emergency teams rushed toward the last known location over the Atlantic Ocean near the coast of Ireland. But deep down, many already feared the worst. As rescuers arrived, they found debris scattered across the ocean. Pieces of the aircraft. Floating luggage. Personal belongings. Fragments of lives interrupted in an instant. The sight was heartbreaking. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. And scattered across its surface were the final traces of Air India Flight 182. There were no survivors. Not one. All 329 people on board had lost their lives. 307 passengers. 22 crew members. Men. Women. Children. Entire families. Gone. In a single moment. For rescue workers, the mission quickly transformed. It was no longer a rescue. It became a recovery. And with every item recovered from the water, the scale of the tragedy became more painful. A child's shoe. A family photograph. A passport. A wedding ring. Small objects. Carrying entire stories. Stories that would never be finished. Back in Canada, phones began to ring. Families waited for news. Many still believed there had been some mistake. Some sat beside televisions for hours. Others stayed near telephones, hoping for a call that never came. Hope slowly turned into heartbreak. Parents waited for children who would never return. Children waited for parents who would never walk through the door again. Husbands. Wives. Brothers. Sisters. Entire communities were shattered. For many families, the pain was made even worse by uncertainty. There were no final goodbyes. No last conversations. No chance to say farewell. One moment their loved ones were flying across the Atlantic. The next, they were gone. Across Canada. Across India. And across the world. People struggled to understand how something so terrible could happen. Memorial services were held. Candles were lit. Prayers were offered. Names were read aloud. Hundreds of names. Each one representing a life. A dream. A future. Many of the victims were children. Young lives filled with possibility. Students. Teenagers. Little boys and girls who had their entire futures ahead of them. The loss was almost impossible to comprehend. And for the families left behind, the grief did not end when the headlines faded. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. But the empty chairs remained. Birthdays came and went. Holidays arrived. Family gatherings continued. Yet someone was always missing. A voice no longer heard. A smile no longer seen. A place at the table forever empty. As investigators worked to uncover the truth, the families waited. Not just for answers, but for justice. Because somewhere behind this tragedy, someone had made a choice. A choice that had stolen 329 innocent lives. And until the truth was known, the pain remained unfinished. The ocean had claimed the wreckage. But it could never erase the memory. The memory of Air India Flight 182. The memory of 329 people who boarded a plane expecting to arrive safely. And never came home. As the world mourned, investigators began searching for answers. How could a modern Boeing 747, flying in perfect weather, simply disappear from the sky? At first, many possibilities were considered. Mechanical failure. Structural failure. Pilot error. Even a sudden catastrophic malfunction. Investigators examined every piece of wreckage recovered from the Atlantic. Every radio transmission. Every maintenance record. Every detail. Nothing was ignored. Because somewhere among the debris, the truth was waiting. The cockpit crew quickly came under scrutiny. As they often do after an aviation disaster. Did the pilots make a mistake? Did they miss a warning? Did something happen inside the cockpit? But evidence pointed elsewhere. The aircraft had been functioning normally. The crew had reported no emergency. No unusual behavior. No technical problems. And most importantly, there had been no distress call. That fact alone troubled investigators. Experienced pilots facing mechanical failure usually try to communicate. Even a few seconds can be enough. Yet Flight 182 transmitted nothing. The silence suggested something terrifying. Whatever happened, happened instantly. Attention then turned to the aircraft itself. Investigators studied the Boeing 747 structure. Its engines. Its fuel systems. Its maintenance history. Again. Nothing. The aircraft had no known mechanical issue capable of causing such sudden destruction. No evidence of engine failure. No evidence of structural fatigue. No evidence of weather-related damage. The mystery deepened. If it wasn't the pilots, and it wasn't the aircraft, then what was it? Then investigators began examining recovered debris more closely. Very closely. And that's when they found something unusual. Tiny traces. Microscopic evidence. Fragments that didn't belong. Signs of an explosion. Not an explosion caused by the aircraft itself. An explosion from inside. Suddenly, the entire investigation changed direction. What if Flight 182 hadn't crashed? What if it had been destroyed? Forensic experts were brought in. Chemical testing began. Piece by piece, the evidence started forming a horrifying picture. Investigators discovered traces of explosive material. The kind not normally found aboard commercial aircraft. The kind that pointed towards something deliberate. Something planned. Something criminal. The possibility of terrorism could no longer be ignored. As investigators dug deeper, another disturbing discovery emerged. Thousands of miles away, in Canada, a separate explosion had occurred on the very same day. At Tokyo's Narita Airport, a suitcase destined for another Air India flight had exploded during baggage transfer. 2 baggage handlers were killed. The timing was impossible to ignore. 2 explosions. 2 Air India flights. One day. One pattern. Now investigators knew they were not looking at an accident. They were looking at a coordinated attack. But who was responsible? And how had they managed to place a bomb aboard an international airliner? The answer led investigators through years of intelligence reports, extremist groups, and hidden plots. They discovered that the bomb had been concealed inside luggage. A suitcase checked onto the flight under a false identity. The passenger connected to that baggage never boarded the aircraft. Yet the suitcase continued its journey. At the time, security procedures were not as strict as they are today. Baggage could sometimes travel even when the passenger did not. A weakness. A loophole. One that would prove deadly. Investigators eventually concluded that a sophisticated explosive device had been hidden inside the suitcase. A timer had been used. Carefully calculated. Carefully planned. The bomb sat unnoticed among hundreds of bags inside the cargo hold. Waiting. As Flight 182 crossed the Atlantic, the timer counted down. Second by second. Minute by minute. Until it reached 0. At 35,000 feet. The explosion tore through the aircraft. The force was catastrophic. The Boeing 747 broke apart almost instantly. There was no opportunity for the pilots to react. No chance to issue a distress call. No chance to save the aircraft. The disaster had been decided long before the flight ever left the ground. Investigators eventually identified the attack as an act of terrorism linked to extremists seeking political revenge. The victims had done nothing wrong. The crew had done nothing wrong. The aircraft had done nothing wrong. Yet 329 innocent people paid the price. And perhaps the most painful truth of all was that this tragedy was preventable. The aircraft did not fail. The pilots did not fail. The weather did not fail. The failure happened on the ground. A hidden bomb. A security weakness. And a chain of decisions that allowed a deadly suitcase to reach an aircraft filled with innocent lives. When the final report was completed, the truth shocked the world. Air India Flight 182 had not been lost to an accident. It had been murdered. And the lessons from that terrible day would change aviation security forever. When the truth finally emerged, the world was forced to confront a painful reality. Air India Flight 182 was not brought down by weather. Not by mechanical failure. Not by pilot error. It was destroyed by a bomb that should never have reached the aircraft. And that realization changed aviation forever. Governments began reviewing airport security procedures. Airlines re-examined how baggage was handled. Investigators studied every weakness that had allowed the attack to happen. Because one thing had become painfully clear. The danger did not always come from the sky. Sometimes, it began on the ground. One of the most important changes involved passenger baggage. For years, it had been possible for checked luggage to continue its journey even if the passenger did not board the aircraft. After Flight 182, that practice came under intense scrutiny. New security procedures were introduced. More screening. More verification. More accountability. Airports around the world strengthened their defenses against terrorism. Security checkpoints became stricter. Baggage screening technology improved. Intelligence agencies increased cooperation across borders. The lessons learned from Flight 182 helped shape many of the aviation security systems travelers rely on today. Systems that millions of people pass through every day, often without realizing why they exist. Every security check, every baggage scan, every additional layer of protection carries the legacy of tragedies like this one. And while those measures cannot erase the past, they help protect the future. But perhaps the most important lesson is not about technology, or procedures, or regulations. It is about people. 329 innocent people boarded that aircraft on a summer morning in 1985. They expected to arrive at their destination. They expected to see their families, to continue their lives, to celebrate birthdays, attend weddings, build careers, watch their children grow. But those futures were stolen. And that is why their story matters. Because behind every number is a human being. Behind every aviation disaster is a family forever changed. And behind every safety rule is a lesson written in loss. Today, Air India Flight 182 remains one of the deadliest acts of aviation terrorism in history. A tragedy that shocked nations. A tragedy that exposed dangerous weaknesses. And a tragedy that ultimately made the skies safer for generations to come. So the next time you board an aircraft and place your bag on the security scanner, remember this story. Remember the lives behind the lesson. Remember the families who never got the chance to say goodbye. Because safety regulations are not created by luck. They are created by sacrifice. And sometimes, the safest flights in history are built upon the hardest lessons ever learned. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more real aviation stories that change the world forever. Because some tragedies should never be forgotten. Not because of how they ended, but because of what they taught us. And because the 329 souls of Air India Flight 182 deserve to be remembered forever.